Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. Yes, Mrs. Worthington, I hear you loud and clear, Susan Morgan said, forcing a polite smile. Absolutely, she added, her tone crisp but composed. Of course, I'll take care of it right away. Will this woman ever stop talking? Susan fought the urge to sigh as the chairman's wife rambled on. As Birch Grove's development director, she was obligated to nod and act interested, even when her patience wore thin with people who believed their wealth made them important. I've had enough of these entitled snobs, she thought with irritation. A glance at her watch only worsened her mood. She was already late for an important meeting, and was about to cut the woman off when, mercifully, Mrs. Worthington finally stopped herself. Oh dear, I can't be late for my hairdresser. Of course, Mrs. Worthington, my apologies for taking up your time, Susan replied smoothly, hiding her exasperation. The second the call ended, she sent a quick message to her husband. Dinner with a client. Don't wait up. She straightened her desk, checked her reflection, then grabbed her purse and headed out of her cramped office, once a butler's pantry in Birch Grove Mansion. Off for the day, Senora Morgan, her assistant Evita called out. Not breaking stride, Susan answered curtly. Meeting with a donor, I'm done after that. Evita watched her disappear down the marble floor hallway before ducking into the executive director's office. Did he already leave? About 10 minutes ago, Christina confirmed, said it was urgent. Evita smirked. Like clockwork every single week. Do they honestly think we don't notice? She nodded toward the exit. Idiots. The two women laughed and got back to work. Professor Daniel Morgan scanned the lecture hall, knowing most of his students were already mentally checked out. He tapped his tablet and a graph appeared on the screen behind him. Today we're diving into supply, demand, and pricing, he announced. A dramatic groan echoed from the back, drawing chuckles from the class. Daniel grinned. I know, sounds dry. But these ideas control everything around us. Let me prove it. He held up a framed print. Anyone recognize this? That's Andy Warhol's Marilyn Monroe. A student called out. Right artist, wrong setting, Daniel joked, triggering a ripple of laughter. But yes, you're correct. In 2022, a similar painting sold for $195 million, the highest price ever paid for an American artist's work. A few students whistled in disbelief. Any billionaires in the room? Daniel teased. No, didn't think so. But you could walk into a bookstore and grab a Marilyn poster for $20. Why the difference? Price. At $195 million, only one buyer exists. At $20, everyone can afford it. He lifted a hand before anyone could object. Yes, there are other factors in play, but price is the biggest driver of demand. When class ended, Daniel was pleased to see a handful of students lingering, engaged in animated discussion. At least they're thinking, he mused. Back in his office, he checked his phone. Dinner with a client. Don't wait, Susan's message read. That unsettled feeling returned. Lately, these client dinners were becoming a pattern. Still, her absence meant he had time to check in on his father. Ezra Morgan had been battling Parkinson's for years, stubbornly refusing to leave the home he'd lived in for decades. Daniel had hired multiple caregivers, but Ezra had sent every single one packing until Paloma showed up. She had two things working in her favor: striking good looks, which Ezra appreciated, and an unshakable attitude. When he snapped, she snapped right back. If he pushed, she pushed harder. Eventually, he had grudgingly accepted her. She's not a pushover, he'd admitted with a rare smirk. 10 months into the job, Paloma caught Daniel off guard with an announcement. This is my son, Marco. My mother was taking care of him, but now she's looking after my sick grandmother. I can't manage both your father and Marco. Ezra, to everyone's surprise, came up with a solution. Move in here, plenty of space. I'll cover rent and food. Paloma hesitated. What about Marco? You don't want a 6-year-old running around. Ezra scoffed. I raised a 6-year-old here before. He can keep me company when I get tired of you. She took the idea to Daniel, who saw the practicality. It's your call, he said. Dad could use the company, and I'd feel better knowing someone he trusts is around. Paloma agreed, but added quietly, it wouldn't hurt for you to visit more, for his sake. And Marco's. A faint blush crept onto her cheeks, and before Daniel could respond, she was gone. He was left confused but relieved when she accepted the offer. 18 months later, the arrangement was working out better than expected. Ezra actually listened to Paloma, and Daniel didn't mind sticking around for dinner. Her cooking beat anything the university had to offer. Susan detested the long drive through the countryside, but secrecy was a necessity. Neither she nor Grant could afford to be seen together while meeting with potential donors. The sight of rundown homes and rusting trailers only soured her mood. I grew up in a dump like this, she thought bitterly. After her father walked out, Susan, her sister, and their mother barely scraped by. Bullied in school, she poured her energy into academics, earning a full ride to the University of Pennsylvania. While her classmates partied and spent summers in Europe, she juggled coursework and multiple part-time jobs. Everything changed in her senior year when a promising young teaching assistant, Daniel Morgan, started paying attention to her. Smart, charming, ambitious, he checked all the right boxes. Susan had dated before, but knew better than to earn a reputation that might hold her back. When Daniel showed interest, she saw more than just romance. She saw opportunity. He never stood a chance, she thought smugly. But disappointment came quickly when Daniel rejected high-paying finance careers in favor of academia. She had hoped he'd pursue university leadership. Economics professors had become college presidents before, after all. 7 years into their marriage, Susan felt suffocated in a dull college town, while Daniel found satisfaction teaching undergrads. This isn't the life I signed up for, she seethed. To cope, she took a position at Birch Grove Mansion and Museum, once the lavish home of a Pennsylvania oil tycoon. The job felt like a cruel joke, surrounded by spoiled elites, forced to smile through their tedious conversations and empty gossip. Not for much longer, she thought, pulling into a secluded motel parking lot. She had found her escape, and she had no intention of looking back. As Daniel stepped out of his car at his father's house, the front door flew open, and a small figure came sprinting toward him. "Senor Daniel, come play soccer with me," Marco called excitedly. "Marco," Paloma scolded, "let's send your Daniel rest. He's had a long day of work." Daniel waved her off with a grin. "It's fine. Let's see what you've got, kid." They kicked the scuffed-up soccer ball across the yard, laughter ringing through the crisp evening air. On the porch, Ezra watched with an amused glint in his eye, cheering them on like it was the World Cup. By the time Paloma called them in for dinner, Daniel was more than ready to stop. "I'm way too old to keep up with him," he admitted with a chuckle. Expecting something traditionally Latin, Daniel was pleasantly surprised when Paloma served chicken kebabs, basmati rice, Greek salad, and warm pita. Ezra grumbled about missing his hamburger, but cleaned his plate anyway. They shared dinner like a real family, swapping stories and talking about the days ahead. It wasn't until later in the evening that Daniel realized something he hadn't thought about. Susan. Not once. As they cleared the table, Paloma leaned in slightly. "In case you were wondering, I keep Senor Morgan on a Mediterranean diet. It's good for his heart." "I appreciate that, Paloma. Whatever you're doing, it's working." I haven't seen him this lively in a long time. After eating, they moved to the living room. Marco, usually bursting with energy, had grown unusually quiet. Even kids run out of fuel eventually, Daniel thought with amusement. Paloma noticed too. "Bedtime, Carino," she said softly, leading Marco to his room. Already half asleep, Marco mumbled, "Can Senor Daniel say goodnight?" Paloma hesitated. "He's probably busy, Carino." Daniel stepped in. "I'd be happy to." Marco wrapped his small arms around him in a brief hug before rolling over, already drifting off. When Daniel returned to the living room, his father was fast asleep in his chair. With Paloma's help, he carefully guided Ezra to bed, surprised at how frail the old man felt. As he prepared to leave, Paloma spoke again. "Why rush off?" she asked, instinctively reaching for his hand but stopping herself. "Can I ask you something? That painting in the living room, what's the story behind it?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, but followed her. Hanging prominently on the wall was a striking blue-toned portrait of Marilyn Monroe, an unmistakable Warhol. It was framed behind reinforced glass, secured by infrared sensors and pressure-sensitive pads. "I take it Dad filled you in on the security?" Daniel asked. Paloma nodded. "That's why Marco isn't allowed to play in here anymore. He kicked the ball too close once, and security showed up within seconds." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "How did your father even get something like this?" He smiled, already anticipating her reaction. "It's actually a great story. My grandfather was a printer in Germany before World War II. When he escaped to America, he arrived with almost nothing, not even his full name. An Ellis Island official shortened Morgan Stern to Morgan." Paloma listened intently as Daniel continued. "He found work in New York, and eventually taught my dad everything he knew about silk screen printing. In the early 60s, my father took a job at a print shop where Warhol's pieces were being produced." Paloma's eyes widened. "You mean Warhol?" Daniel nodded. "One night, my dad was working late when Warhol himself stopped by. He saw my father, and on a whim handed him this print, signed with a personal note on the back. He just gave it to him." Paloma asked incredulously. "At the time, Warhol's work wasn't worth much. A few $100 maybe. He probably never imagined it would become priceless." Paloma frowned. "Isn't it risky keeping something like that here?" "Very few people even know it exists, and it's never been officially appraised," Daniel assured her. "But after that record-breaking auction, Dad upgraded the security. It's not Fort Knox, but as you saw, even a slight movement near it sets off alarms." She studied the painting. "I can see why he holds on to it. It's not just a valuable piece of art. It's part of your family's story." Daniel nodded. "Exactly, and I respect him for never letting it go." They stood in silence for a moment before Daniel finally said his goodbyes. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror at the warmly lit house behind him. He sighed. "I wish my home felt like that." Susan was rarely around, and even when she was, the house felt cold and lifeless. Shaking off the thought, he focused on the road ahead. Susan stepped out of the motel feeling refreshed. Her body relaxed in a way only good sessions could provide. She smiled smugly. Grant Nicholson never disappoints. His passion was endless, driven by something deeper than desire. He was in love with her. He worshipped her, always ensuring she left satisfied and breathless. But as she drove home, the rush began to fade, and irritation crept in. Daniel wasn't a bad husband. He wasn't even bad in bed, but he lacked ambition. Grant thrives among millionaires. Daniel prefers to lecture students about supply and demand. "I can't take another faculty dinner talking about research papers and tenure." Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Once Ezra dies and Daniel inherits, I'm done. My share of the Warhol sale and this house will give me the life I deserve with a man who actually belongs in high society." Pulling into the driveway of their outdated Victorian, a house provided by the university, she smirked. "I can tolerate this dump a little longer. And so can my husband." The next time Daniel saw Paloma, something was different. He had just finished proctoring an exam when she appeared in his office doorway, pale and unsettled. His stomach tightened. "What happened? Is Dad okay, Marco?" "They're fine," she reassured him quickly, closing the door behind her. "My mom's with them." But she hesitated. Daniel leaned forward. "Just tell me. You know I have family nearby, right?" "I didn't. But go on," Daniel replied, brows furrowing. "My sister Christina works at Birch Grove as Grant Nicholson's secretary." Daniel's stomach tightened. What happened? Is Dad okay, Marco? They're fine, Paloma said quickly, closing the door behind her. My mom's with them. But she hesitated, biting her lip. Daniel leaned forward, his voice tense. Just tell me. Paloma took a breath. You know I have family nearby, right? I didn't, Daniel replied, brows furrowing. But go on. My sister Christina works at Birch Grove as Grant Nicholson's secretary. Daniel's brow furrowed. Okay. Paloma exhaled slowly. She sees Mrs. Morgan there every day. Well, yeah, Daniel said. Susan works there. Yes, but Paloma hesitated, then spoke carefully. Daniel, I'm so sorry, but your wife and Senior Nicholson, they're having an affair. The words landed like a punch to the gut. His first instinct was denial, but deep down it made too much sense. The late nights, the cold distance, the vague excuses, it had been right in front of him all along. He forced himself to stay calm. How does your sister know? Paloma looked away. We have a cousin who works as a maid at the Pocono View Motel. It's about 20 miles up the highway. Daniel clenched his jaw. Keep talking. They meet there, almost every week. The last time was 2 days ago, the night you had dinner with us. His mind raced. He remembered how late Susan had come home that night. The flimsy excuse about a last-minute work event. His hands curled into fists. Paloma, I can't make accusations based on rumors, even if they come from family. I understand, she said softly, but you don't have to take our word for it. There's proof. Come with me, right now. Half an hour later, they arrived at the motel, where Paloma introduced Daniel to her cousin Lourdes. The woman spoke little English, but Paloma translated as she led them into a storage room. Lourdes reached up, removed the vent cover, and pulled out a small recording device. Daniel's stomach twisted. Where did that come from? He demanded. Paloma sighed. When Christina told me about Susan and Nicholson, Lourdes recognized them as regular guests. I gave her this recorder because I needed to know the truth. I hope you understand. Daniel barely registered her words. Did you listen to it? Paloma nodded. Yes, when Lourdes played it for me, I knew I had to tell you. Daniel's voice was ice. Play it. Lourdes hesitated, then pressed the button. Susan's voice filled the room, unmistakable. Oh my God, Grant, yes, yes, don't stop. Lourdes immediately stopped the playback, casting an uneasy glance at Paloma. Do you want her to start from the beginning? Paloma asked quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. No, he said coldly. Skip ahead. Lourdes turned the dial and hit play. Soft rustling and the rhythmic creak of a bed filled the silence before the conversation resumed. Susan, you're incredible, Grant Nicholson sighed. I can't keep living like this. Just say the word and I'll leave Greta tomorrow. Don't be an idiot, Grant, Susan snapped. We wait until Daniel's father dies. Once Daniel inherits the world, we'll divorce. He'll have to sell the painting to settle, and I'll walk away with half. Then you can divorce Greta, and we'll finally be free. Are you certain you'll get half? I thought inheritances were protected. Susan laughed, her voice dripping with confidence. Not if you know the right people. My lawyer's already on it. He's working on contingency, so he's motivated to win. Grant groaned. But how much longer do we have to wait? Patience, babe. Ezra's health is failing fast. It won't be long. Daniel's face darkened as he slammed the stop button. Unbelievable, she had it all figured out. Rage boiled over, and he drove his fist into the counter, making both women jump. Without another word, he stormed out the door. Paloma hugged Lourdes quickly, grabbed the recorder, and chased after him. She found Daniel standing by his car, staring into the empty street. I tried so hard, he muttered, voice hollow. I knew she was unhappy, but I kept fighting for us. Now I understand why it was pointless. His jaw tightened. Get in, we're going back. The drive was tense and silent until Paloma finally spoke. I hope you're not mad at me. Daniel shook his head. No, you did me a favor, but Susan, I'm done playing nice. Paloma swallowed hard. You're not planning anything dangerous, are you? He glanced at her, eyes cold and focused. Oh, they'll pay. But not the way you're thinking. I'll make sure they regret every choice they made. She hesitated, then reached for his hand. Please, Daniel, don't ruin your life over this. He squeezed her hand briefly. Don't worry, I'll handle it. His gaze turned distant. I need to talk to my father. He was so proud when I married Susan. He thought we'd build a family together. This will break his heart. Daniel laughed bitterly. It's funny, though. I used to get frustrated when Susan said she wasn't ready for kids. Now, I'm nothing but relieved. The rest of the ride passed in silence. Telling Ezra was like reopening a fresh wound. The old man sat quietly for a moment before nodding, his face hardening with determination. First step, he rasped. File for divorce immediately. I'll call my lawyer first thing tomorrow. Don't tip her off. Ezra warned, his eyes sharp despite the fatigue in his features. Stay calm until everything's in place. Daniel nodded grimly. That won't be a problem. We barely speak anymore. Diving into work became his escape. He buried himself in grading, prepping lectures, and pretending life hadn't just fallen apart. When Ezra's lawyer recommended a top divorce attorney, Daniel didn't hesitate. He called immediately, only to find the earliest appointment was Thursday. Frustrated, he considered finding someone else but dismissed the thought just as quickly. If Susan's playing dirty, I need the best. By Thursday, Daniel was sure he'd made the right choice. The lawyer, sharp-eyed and confident, wasted no time cutting to the chase. I see what your wife's angling for, she said, flipping through notes. But don't worry. Once we file, the Warhol will be untouchable in the settlement. She promised to prepare the paperwork that afternoon and file the petition by week's end. Almost there, Daniel thought, leaving the office. Susan and Grant won't know what hit them. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of relief. It didn't last. Sunday night, his phone rang. Paloma's panicked sobs burst through the speaker. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I tried. I really tried. Daniel's heart pounded. Tried what? What happened? Is it Marco? My dad. It's Senior Morgan, she cried. The paramedics just got here. The line went dead. Daniel bolted from his chair, adrenaline flooding his system. He barely remembered grabbing his keys and tearing down the road, running red lights without a second thought. When he reached his father's house, flashing emergency lights painted the street in harsh reds and blues. An ambulance, a fire truck, and a police cruiser blocked the driveway. Daniel jumped out and sprinted toward the front porch as EMTs wheeled a gurney through the doorway. Is he okay? Daniel shouted, breathless. A paramedic glanced up, face grim. Are you his son? Yes. Is he alive? The man's expression softened. I'm sorry, it was too late. Most likely a massive stroke. But couldn't you defibrillate something? The paramedic sighed. Even if we'd restarted his heart, the brain damage would have been catastrophic. You wouldn't have wanted that, neither would he. Daniel stood frozen as they loaded the gurney into the ambulance. The lights flashed, but the siren stayed silent as the vehicle pulled away. Only then did he move, his legs heavy as lead. Inside, Paloma met him in the hallway, her face streaked with tears. Without thinking, he caught her as she collapsed into his arms. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I did CPR until the medics got here, but it didn't matter. He was gone so fast. Daniel gently cupped her face. It's not your fault. They said it happened instantly. There was nothing you could have done. Her tears didn't stop. He was fine, talking, laughing. Then he clutched his head and just collapsed. It was awful, Daniel. He led her to a chair and brought her a glass of water. After a moment, he asked quietly, Where's Marco? Her eyes widened. Dios mío, he's still at school. I need to get him. Without waiting, she grabbed her keys and rushed out, leaving Daniel alone in the silent house. He sank into Ezra's old armchair, numb as the weight of reality settled on his chest. He'd known his father's health was fragile, but knowing never made it easier. Tears welled, and this time he didn't fight them. For the first time in years, Daniel cried openly, with no one to witness his breaking point. It took nearly an hour for Daniel to compose himself. He scribbled a to-do list, clinging to structure like a lifeline. Notify relatives, arrange the funeral, call the lawyer. The routine steadied him, if only slightly. After the first round of calls, he locked the house and drove straight to Birch Grove. There was one more thing he needed to do: talk to Susan. I need to see her face when she hears. Susan looked up, startled, as Daniel entered her office unannounced. She blinked once, then molded her features into the perfect mask of sorrow. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "I'm so sorry. I know how much you loved him." Her performance was flawless, but Daniel saw through it. The tears were forced. The concern was fake. "She's already thinking about the inheritance." He nodded stiffly, muttered a hollow thanks, and left without another word. The moment he exited, Susan practically ran down the hallway, bursting into Grant's office with flushed cheeks and shining eyes. "Grant," she panted, "Ezra Morgan is dead." Grant froze, blinking in disbelief. "Wait, what? You're serious?" Susan's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "Dead serious. Don't you get it? This is the moment we've been waiting for. Daniel inherits everything. I'll file for divorce, claim my share, and we'll finally have the life we deserve." Grant's shock melted into excitement. "I can't believe it's finally happening. When are you filing?" Susan paused, calculating. "After the funeral. I can't risk looking heartless, but once that's done, nothing will stand in our way." "Good," Grant agreed, grinning. "Don't wait too long. I need time to deal with Greta." The days after Ezra's passing blurred together for Daniel. His immediate focus was arranging the funeral. Though Ezra hadn't been particularly devout, he'd left clear instructions for a traditional Jewish burial, requiring everything to be completed within 24 hours. Once the burial was over, Daniel organized a memorial service for friends, neighbors, and colleagues who couldn't attend the funeral. Ezra had no living relatives, but many old friends from his long career showed up to pay their respects. Daniel's coworkers offered quiet condolences, their presence providing a small measure of comfort. The most difficult part was enduring both events with Susan at his side. She played the grieving daughter-in-law flawlessly, tearful, soft-spoken, and seemingly heartbroken. But Daniel, now aware of her betrayal, saw through every gesture, his sorrow slowly hardening into icy resentment. In the middle of the chaos, Daniel's lawyer called, ready to finalize the divorce filing. Daniel, emotionally drained, he hesitated. "Let me get back to you," he said quietly. "I can't deal with this right now." After the memorial, another issue surfaced. While cleaning up at Ezra's house, Paloma approached Daniel hesitantly. "When should Marco and I move out?" she asked, voice low. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Move out? Why would you do that?" Paloma shrugged, uncertainly. "This was your father's home. I figured it wouldn't feel right staying here." Daniel shook his head firmly. "You're not going anywhere. The house is empty without you too. If you leave, it'll just sit there, an easy target for break-ins. And Marco's finally thriving in school. I'm not about to turn his life upside down." Her eyes softened with relief. "Thank you, Daniel. I can't tell you how much that means." With the funeral behind him, Daniel shifted his attention to settling the estate. Ezra's lawyer walked him through the probate process, explaining it would likely take months. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned something unexpected. "Your father requested an immediate reading of his will," the lawyer said. He left a specific list of attendees. As the lawyer read the names aloud, understanding dawned on Daniel, his lips curling into a grim smile. "Let's make it official," he said. Send formal invitations. It'll be harder for anyone to ignore. Consider it done, the lawyer replied. On the appointed day, Daniel and Susan arrived separately, exchanging little more than tense nods. Since Ezra's passing, they'd barely spoken, though Daniel couldn't ignore the excitement simmering beneath Susan's somber expression. Paloma entered quietly, introduced herself to the lawyer, and took a seat. Susan's eyes narrowed as she leaned toward Daniel. "Why is she here?" she hissed. "Because she was invited," Daniel answered coolly. Before Susan could press further, the door opened, and Grant Nicholson strode in, looking bewildered. "Grant," Susan gasped. "What are you doing here?" He held up the invitation. "Got one of these, no idea why." The lawyer stood, adjusting his glasses. "Thank you all for coming." This reading was Mr. Ezra Morgan's explicit instruction. He cleared his throat and began. First, Ezra Morgan appointed his son, Daniel Morgan, as executor of his estate. Daniel will be responsible for settling debts and distributing assets. Susan exchanged a triumphant glance with Grant. Daniel saw it, but kept his face blank. "The first bequest concerns Mr. Morgan's residence," the lawyer continued. Ezra Morgan left the house and surrounding property to Paloma Contreras in appreciation for her dedicated care during his final years. Additionally, she will receive the remaining funds in his checking account for household expenses. The room exploded. "Excuse me," Susan shrieked, jumping from her seat. "That house belongs to Daniel, not some maid." Paloma looked equally stunned. "This has to be a mistake," she stammered. "The house should go to Daniel." The lawyer remained composed. "The will is unambiguous. Shall I continue?" The room fell silent. "The next item concerns the Warhol painting displayed in Mr. Morgan's living room," the lawyer said, flipping the page. "He bequeathed it to the Birch Grove Mansion and Museum for their permanent collection." Grant inhaled sharply. Susan's face twisted with fury. "No, that painting belongs to Daniel. How could Ezra do this?" The lawyer barely blinked. "The will is explicit, Mrs. Morgan. However, this bequest is conditional." The tension in the room thickened. "The conditions are as follows," the lawyer read, voice steady. "First, Birch Grove must immediately and permanently terminate any professional relationship with Mrs. Susan Morgan. Second, Mr. Grant Nicholson must immediately and permanently end all personal relations with Mrs. Susan Morgan." Silence blanketed the room. "If either condition is unmet," the lawyer continued, "the painting will be donated to the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. And before you ask, Mr. Nicholson, the museum has already been notified. They'll be closely monitoring compliance." Susan shot to her feet, face flushed with rage. "This is insane. Ezra had no right to meddle in my life." She whirled toward Daniel, eyes blazing. "This is your doing. You're trying to rob me of what's mine." Daniel leaned back in his chair, voice calm but cold. "I'd never cheat you, Susan. In fact, here's exactly what you're entitled to." He slid an envelope across the table. Susan snatched it, tore it open, and froze, eyes widening at the sight of the divorce papers inside. "What is this?" she demanded. "Your official notice," Daniel replied evenly. "I've already filed." Before she could respond, he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of her stunned expression. "Susan Morgan, consider yourself served." Her face contorted with fury. "You fool, you can't divorce me. I'll divorce you." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. Too late for that. Grant, pale and visibly shaken, quietly slipped out of the room. Susan, realizing he'd abandoned her, froze for a moment before scrambling after him, her heels clattering across the marble floor. Paloma glanced anxiously at Daniel, her brow furrowed. "This doesn't feel right, Daniel. Your father should have left the house to you. You're his son." Daniel offered a reassuring smile. "Dad and I talked about it. He loved you and Marco like family. His biggest concern was making sure you'd be secure after he was gone. I agreed with his decision. He rested a hand gently on her shoulder. This was how he showed gratitude for your care, your patience, and the way you always stood your ground when he got stubborn. It wasn't just generosity, Paloma. It was love. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. We loved him too. He was family. At Birch Grove, Susan burst into Grant's office, breathless and flushed. "Grant," she exclaimed, "this isn't a loss, it's an opportunity. With the Warhol, Birch Grove will outshine every museum in the region, and now nothing stands between us." Grant, sitting stiffly behind his desk, gave her a hard look. "Did you not hear the conditions attached to the bequest?" Susan waved a dismissive hand. "That clause can't hold up legally. Who cares about some petty gossip?" His patience snapped. "You think Birch Grove's board will risk a lawsuit against the Warhol Museum? They've got the Carnegie Foundation behind them. A fight like that could sink us." Grant stood abruptly, grabbing a folder from his desk. "I already spoke with Mr. Worthington. These are your termination papers. You're officially out." Susan's face flushed deep red. "After everything we've been through, you're cutting me loose." Just like that. Her voice sharpened. "Do you really want me telling your wife about us?" Grant's expression didn't waver. "Already did. Now I'm heading home to beg for forgiveness and hope the prestige of being an executive director's wife convinces her to tolerate my stupidity." He gestured toward the door. "It's over, Susan. Your severance check's in the mail. Leave the mansion." Susan froze, fists tightening at her sides. Grant braced for an explosion, but she just spun on her heel and stormed out, face cold and unreadable. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she marched down the hallway. Reaching her former office, she swept a few personal items into her handbag. On her way out, she passed Evita, her former secretary, who arched an eyebrow. "Calling it an early day, Mrs. Morgan?" Evita asked, voice laced with sarcasm. "Shut up," Susan snapped, not breaking stride. Evita chuckled. "Bye, honey," she called mockingly, as Susan pushed through the glass doors. Without missing a beat, Evita hurried to Christina's desk, eager to share the latest scandal. Later that evening, Daniel was rummaging through the fridge for something to eat when the sound of keys jingling reached his ears. He straightened just as Susan stepped through the front door, her face drawn and weary. The moment she saw him, anger reignited in her eyes. "This is all because of you, isn't it?" she snapped. "How long have you known about Grant and me?" "Long enough to shut down your little plan," Daniel replied coolly. Her lips curled into a sneer. "So you convinced Ezra to change his will. He was going to leave everything to you, until you turned him against me. Why, Daniel? Why stoop that low?" Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Because I wasn't going to let you profit from his end. Once I learned you planned to classify the Warhol as communal property by donating it to Birch Grove's insurance fund, I had no choice. Exposing your affair, that was just an added perk." Susan let out a bitter laugh. "So you really despised me that much?" Daniel's smile was humorless. "After everything you tried to pull? Absolutely." For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across her face. Then her expression hardened. "Let me ask you something," Daniel said quietly. "Did you ever love me? Or was it always about what I could offer you?" Susan sighed and sank onto the couch. "I think I did, once. You were driven, ambitious, full of potential. I believed you'd climb the ranks, and I'd climb with you." Her smile turned sour. "But then you chose teaching over power and prestige. That's when I realized I'd bet on the wrong man. So yes, I started looking for something better." Daniel's voice was tight with disbelief. "So money and status mattered more than building a life together. That was never enough for you." Susan scoffed. "Building a life? How quaint. That's what people settle for when they lack the drive to succeed. Family, community, stability. They're consolation prizes for losers." Daniel stared at her speechless. "What I want," Susan continued coldly, "is influence. Power. The kind that comes with wealth and connections. Everything else is just window dressing. He considered arguing but saw the futility. She'd made her choice long before this moment. "So what's your plan now?" he asked flatly. Her mask slipped for a moment, revealing exhaustion beneath the anger. "I'm leaving. Thanks to you, my reputation's trashed. I'll pack tonight and go. I won't contest the divorce. Split everything down the middle, and I'll take my share of the savings and half the house proceeds." Daniel crossed his arms. "What house? This place belongs to the university. We don't own it." Her jaw clenched. "You've always been clever. Too bad you never matched that with ambition." Without waiting for a reply, she stalked to the bedroom. 15 minutes later, she reappeared. Suitcase in one hand, garment bag and cosmetics case in the other. "I'm done here," she announced coldly. "My lawyer will contact yours. Let's wrap this up quickly." Pausing at the door, she gave Daniel one last bitter smile. "At least we agree on one thing. We both want out." Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching her closely. "Where will you go?" Lifting her chin defiantly, she replied. "As far as I can, somewhere I can start fresh, with someone who actually knows how to win." The door slammed behind her. Daniel stood there for a long moment, exhaling slowly as a faint smile touched his lips. Good riddance. Susan kept her word. The divorce moved swiftly, though Daniel resented paying spousal support. Still, considering her sudden unemployment, he accepted it as a small price for freedom. Honestly, his lawyer noted dryly, it's a bargain given what she tried to pull. Meanwhile, Daniel tackled the mountain of tasks required to settle Ezra's estate, filing death certificates, stopping Social Security payments, notifying creditors, and navigating endless legal paperwork. Ezra had managed his finances the old-fashioned way, writing paper checks for everything. Daniel spent weeks writing more checks than he had in years before finally transitioning the accounts to digital management. The workload was exhausting, but came with an unexpected silver lining. It kept him around Paloma and Marco. His campus-provided house felt sterile and empty, while Ezra's place, though full of reminders, radiated warmth and life. Daniel often stayed late, sorting documents, handling bills, and quietly reflecting as he sifted through his father's belongings. Paloma never seemed to mind. "Cooking for two is tricky," she'd say with a gentle smile. "Stay for dinner, Daniel, please." Even after most estate matters were settled, her invitations continued, and Daniel found himself accepting without hesitation. Dinners turned into evenings filled with laughter, stories, and quiet moments. What had once been a house tinged with loss slowly transformed into something else, something that felt less like an obligation and more like home. A few weeks later, Daniel's phone buzzed with an unexpected call from his father's attorney. "The probate court just approved the final paperwork for your father's estate," the lawyer informed him. "You're officially authorized to distribute the assets according to the will." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Already? I thought probate usually dragged on for months." "That's true under normal circumstances," the lawyer chuckled. "But your father's case seemed to jump to the front of the line. I have a feeling Birch Grove's board members pulled some strings. They're eager to claim their prize." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, I guess it's time to move forward." Barely an hour later, his phone rang again. Grant Nicholson's name flashed on the screen. "When can Birch Grove expect to take possession of the Warhol?" Grant asked, his voice unnaturally polite. "As you know, both the museum and I have fully complied with the conditions outlined in the will. Now that probate's finalized, we're ready to proceed." Though the legal hurdles were cleared, logistical complications quickly emerged. The museum's curator insisted her team personally handle the packing and transportation of the silk screen, while the security company responsible for protecting the artwork had to deactivate the alarm system. Coordinating the two crews proved more complex than anticipated, stretching what should have been a simple transfer into a drawn-out ordeal. Grant Nicholson paced his office like a restless child on Christmas Eve. By tomorrow morning, he thought with satisfaction, Birch Grove will finally possess the most valuable artwork in its history. To celebrate, the museum arranged an exclusive unveiling for board members and select VIP guests. Grant barely spared a thought for his past entanglement with Susan. That chapter was closed, replaced by the bright future he envisioned for both Birch Grove and his own career. While the transfer was being arranged, Daniel hired a security team to guard his father's house throughout the process. Seizing the opportunity for a break, he invited Paloma and Marco on a day trip to the Poconos. They hiked sun-dappled trails, enjoyed lunch at Flagstaff Lodge, and rode the Lehigh Gorge Scenic Railway, Marco's laughter echoing through the crisp mountain air. By the time they returned home, dusk had settled. The security guard had finished his shift and left, and the living room was back to its usual state, except for one glaring absence. The vibrant smile of Marilyn Monroe no longer washed from the wall. The emptiness the painting left behind cast a quiet shadow over the house. Trying to lift the mood, Daniel clapped his hands. Too late to cook, how about pizza? The suggestion earned enthusiastic approval. Soon, they were gathered around the kitchen table, swapping stories from their trip while sharing slices. By the time the last crumbs were brushed away, exhaustion had settled over the house. Marco dozed off on the couch, and Daniel gently carried him to bed. As Daniel headed for the door, Paloma stepped into his path, hesitation flickering across her face. "Daniel," she said softly, "would you stay tonight? Without the security system active, I feel safer if you were here. You can sleep in Ezra's room." He hesitated. "Paloma, I don't want to impose." "Please," she interrupted, her eyes pleading. "Just for my peace of mind." After a long, draining day, Daniel didn't have the energy to argue. He sighed and nodded. "All right, just for tonight." Later, after Paloma had retreated to her room, Daniel stripped down to his t-shirt and boxers and settled into his father's bed. The unfamiliar mattress and the memories lingering in the air kept sleep at bay for a while. But fatigue eventually won, pulling him into slumber. Sometime during the night, a faint noise stirred him. He sat up, heart racing, struggling to breathe, straining to hear. There it was again. Soft, measured footsteps padding down the hallway. The door creaked open, and Paloma's silhouette appeared, outlined by the moonlight filtering through the window. Without a word, she slipped into the room and quietly approached the bed. "Paloma," Daniel whispered, startled. "What are you doing?" She pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. "Please, Daniel," she murmured, voice trembling. "It's been so long. I'm tired of feeling alone." Before he could respond, her hand fell away, replaced by the soft urgency of her lips. Whatever protests he might have voiced dissolved instantly. He kissed her back, loneliness melting into warmth and desire. His arm tightened around her waist, drawing her closer, while his free hand traced the curve of her shoulder, brushing against the strap of her nightgown. Paloma's fingers moved with equal urgency, slipping beneath the waistband of his boxers. Daniel sat up, quickly discarding the last of his clothing. He helped her pull the nightgown over her head, pausing briefly as moonlight illuminated her slender, athletic figure. But Paloma didn't give him time for contemplation. "No," she whispered, her voice raw with longing. "I need you now, Daniel. Please, don't make me wait any longer." The plea in her voice shattered the last remnants of restraint. He eased her back against the pillows, settling between her parted thighs, their breathing quickening in unison. "Yes," Paloma gasped, arching to meet him. "Oh, Daniel, don't hold back." He didn't. It had been far too long for both of them. There was nothing left to wait for. The next morning, while Daniel and Paloma were quietly sharing coffee in the kitchen, chaos erupted across town. At Birch Grove, Grant Nicholson's day had started triumphantly, but the celebration quickly unraveled. Just hours before the scheduled unveiling, the museum's curator called, her voice tight with panic. "Mr. Nicholson, we have a problem." Grant frowned, irritation prickling at the edges of his calm. "What now?" "The caterers are here setting up for the event," she explained hurriedly. "But the art movers are refusing to proceed. They're saying the security system was improperly deactivated, and they won't risk transporting the Warhol under these conditions." Grant slammed his hand on the desk. "For God's sake, tell them to get moving, or I'll find another company." "It's not that simple," the curator pressed. "They're unionized. Without proper security protocols, they won't touch the painting. And now the caterer wants to know what to do with the food. Health regulations prevent them from taking it back." Grant's face flushed with anger. "Donate it. I don't care if it's lobster and champagne. Send it to a shelter. Just get it out of here." "Here." "Understood," the curator murmured, ending the call. Grant collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "It's a nightmare." At that moment, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Would you mind explaining why I had to walk all the way from the main gate, and why your staff looks like they've seen a ghost?" Nicholson's head jerked up at the sound of an angry voice. Van Worthington, chairman of Birch Grove's board, stood in the doorway, face flushed with fury. Adrenaline surged through Nicholson as he stumbled to find an explanation. "Sir," he stammered, rising from his chair, "we narrowly avoided a major disaster. There was an issue with the Warhol print. I thought it best to cancel the event rather than risk embarrassment." Worthington's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer. "What kind of issue, Grant?" Nicholson swallowed hard. "Sir, it seems the Warhol is a counterfeit. A fake." Worthington's face darkened to a deep crimson. "How the hell did you let that happen? Aren't you supposed to be an expert? Didn't anyone think to authenticate it before plastering announcements across every media outlet?" Nicholson raised his hands defensively. "I understand how bad it looks, but the timing was complicated. We had to coordinate with Probate, the security company, and the moving team. You should have seen the security Ezra Morgan had around that painting." "Enough," Worthington barked, cutting him off. "Birch Grove will be a laughingstock because of this, and make no mistake, the board holds you accountable." Nicholson paled, mouth opening and closing without sound. "You're fired," Worthington declared, voice like ice, effective immediately. "Once you navigate the traffic jam you caused, leave the property and don't come back." Nicholson opened his mouth to protest, but Worthington had already spun on his heel and stormed out, ignoring the receptionist shrinking behind the front desk. Nicholson collapsed into his chair, face ashen. He buried his head in his hands. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "I'm finished. No museum will touch me after this." He sat there wallowing in defeat until his secretary appeared hesitantly. "Sir," she murmured, "your wife's on the line. She said, if you don't take this call, you might as well not come home tonight." Nicholson exhaled shakily. "Put her through." The moment the line connected, Greta's furious voice exploded in his ear. "Grant, you better have a damn good explanation. I've been stuck in traffic for over an hour, surrounded by people asking why the gala was canceled. They assume I know something because I'm your wife, but I'm just as clueless as they are." Her voice rose sharp with anger. "If your goal was to humiliate me, congratulations. Mission accomplished. Now explain yourself." Nicholson slumped further into his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "Greta," he sighed. "It's simple. When we uncrated the Warhol, we discovered it was a fake." "A fake?" she shrieked, eyes widening in disbelief. "Yes," he confirmed grimly. "We couldn't risk displaying a forgery, so we shut everything down. Unfortunately, we didn't realize the problem until it was too late." He hesitated, dread pooling in his stomach. "And in situations like this, someone has to take the fall. Worthington fired me, effective immediately." Silence hung heavy between them before Greta finally spoke again, her voice cold and cutting. "Worthington fired you, just like that." She let out a bitter laugh. "Honestly, Grant, I'm almost impressed." She took a steadying breath, her tone hardening. Listen carefully. I've overlooked a lot. The arrogance, the shady deals, even your affair with that tramp you hired as development director. I ignored it all for the sake of appearances. But this is the final straw. Her words cut like a knife. Don't bother coming home. My lawyer will file for divorce first thing tomorrow. Pack your things and get out. For good. Nicholson sagged under the weight of her words. Yes, dear, he muttered hollowly. The line went dead. Meanwhile, across town, Paloma burst into Daniel's office, breathless. Daniel, she exclaimed. Christina just told me Grant Nicholson was fired. The Warhol turned out to be a fake, and they canceled the entire event. Worthington kicked him out on the spot. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Not exactly shocking, he said calmly. I told you I'd make sure he paid for what he did. Paloma frowned, confused. How could you have predicted this? Daniel chuckled. I didn't predict it, not precisely, but I set the stage to ensure his downfall was almost inevitable. Her brows knitted. Set the stage. What do you mean? Come with me, Daniel said, standing. I'll explain. Back in his office on campus, Daniel pulled out a chair for Paloma before taking the seat across from her. Let's start with Susan, he began. Her plan was straightforward. Keep the affair with Nicholson under wraps until my father passed. Once Ezra was gone, I'd inherit the estate, and Susan would file for divorce. Pennsylvania law would entitle her to half of everything. Paloma nodded, following closely. The house was valuable, sure, but the real jackpot was the Warhol. Her lawyer had some scheme to argue that despite being inherited, the painting could be classified as marital property. If they'd succeeded, Susan would have walked away with millions, plenty for her and Nicholson to live like royalty. But we exposed the affair, Paloma interjected. Christina and Lords gave you the proof. Exactly, Daniel agreed. Once I knew what they were plotting, I went straight to my father. Dad originally planned to leave the Warhol to me, but after hearing the truth, he agreed to change his will, bequeathing the painting to Birchgrove instead. Paloma's eyes widened as realization dawned. So Susan couldn't claim it during the divorce. Exactly, Daniel confirmed. But that wasn't the only move. The second part was strategic. I had my father include a condition. Birchgrove could only claim the Warhol if they cut all ties with Susan. Paloma stared, astonished. So if they wanted the painting, they had to fire her. Right, and once Birchgrove accepted the bequest, they were locked in. Worthington would never risk losing the painting to the Warhol Museum over a personal scandal. Susan was disposable. So was Grant. Daniel's smirk held no trace of warmth. It worked perfectly. The second Grant realized keeping the Warhol meant cutting Susan loose. He didn't think twice. He dropped her like dead weight. He leaned back, thoughtfully stroking his chin. Honestly, I doubt he ever cared for her. She was just another accessory to his ambitions. But Susan, she truly believed he'd stand by her. When my father's will was read, her entire world collapsed. Her job, her lover, and her marriage all vanished overnight. Exactly like you intended, Paloma murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. What happened to her after the divorce? Daniel chuckled, the sound laced with irony. Funny you ask. A friend mentioned she's living in Allentown now. The only job she could find. Telemarketing, selling insurance policies. Insurance. Paloma's eyes widened. After everything she sacrificed for status and power. Yep, Daniel confirmed, arms folding across his chest. The woman who once sneered at anyone below her standards now spends her days begging strangers to buy coverage. It's poetic. Really. Paloma exhaled slowly. I get why you wanted payback. She betrayed you and tried to rob your family. But what about Nicholson? How'd you manage to take him down? Daniel's grin sharpened. You know about the fake Warhol, right? Bits and pieces, Paloma admitted. But I was more heartbroken to hear Senor Morgan's painting wasn't real. It felt like losing a piece of him. Daniel's expression softened. The fact that your first thought was about my dad says everything about you. He stood, walked over to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a worn manila folder. From it, he withdrew a Marilyn Monroe print, the same one he'd used for years in his economics lectures. He laid it on the desk in front of Paloma. Her brow furrowed. I know this. It's the teaching print you always show your students. Daniel nodded, flipping the print over. Carefully, he peeled back the backing paper, revealing a handwritten dedication scrawled in fading ink. To Ezra Morgan, with thanks for all your hard work. Andy Worrell. Paloma gasped, eyes widening. This is the real one. But it's been sitting here in your office the whole time. Daniel smiled. That's right. Her confusion deepened. But when did you switch them? The print was hanging in your father's living room long before Marco, and I moved in. How did you replace it without tripping all that security? Daniel leaned back, his arms folding across his chest. Originally, Dad didn't think the Warhol was worth much. Warhol sold these screen prints for a few $100 each back in the day. But as prices soared, Dad got nervous about having an original hanging in plain sight. We talked it through, and I suggested swapping it for a cheap replica. I kept the original here where no one would suspect its value, and Dad hung the fake in the living room. Paloma blinked, struggling to process the revelation. So it's been here all along. Exactly, Daniel confirmed. Later, when the art world went wild over Warhol's work, Dad became obsessed with security. That's when he installed all the alarms, cameras, and motion sensors. It became a running joke for him. The more security he added, the more legit the fake seemed. He loved testing the systems like he was guarding Fort Knox. A nostalgic chuckle escaped him. There was never a single break-in, of course. But I'm certain all that over-the-top security is what convinced Nicholson the painting was authentic. Paloma shook her head, still piecing it together. So you made the switch before I ever worked for your father? Exactly, Daniel replied. My original plan was to return the real print after Dad passed. But once I discovered what Grant and Susan were plotting, I realized I had a golden opportunity. I told Dad everything, and he had his lawyer update the will, making sure Nicholson would have to choose Susan or the Warhol. Daniel's smile turned sharp. Then I sat back and let Grant walk right into the trap. He couldn't wait to flaunt his so-called prize, and just like Susan, he lost everything. His career, his reputation, his marriage. Paloma exhaled slowly, shaking her head in disbelief. And now, what happens next? Daniel leaned forward, voice calm but firm. I'm letting the dust settle at Birch Grove. Once the board finishes scrambling, I'll quietly let them know I found the real Warhol tucked away in an old storage bin my father forgot to mention. Once they verify it, I'll suggest they display it with a plaque honoring my dad's connection to Warhol. Paloma frowned. Don't you regret not keeping it? That painting's worth a fortune. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. Not for a second. I never wanted the weight of something so valuable hanging over me. And the money. That was always Susan's fixation, not mine. Watching how her obsession destroyed her only made me more certain. I'm better off without it. His smile softened as he rounded the desk, taking Paloma's hands in his. Besides, he murmured, squeezing her fingers gently. This entire mess showed me what truly matters. Paloma's expression softened, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. And what's that? Same her, Daniel. He held her gaze, voice steady. Starting a new family. Her breath caught. What do you mean? What family? Daniel's voice was calm but resolute. You, Marco, and me. Paloma froze, disbelief etched across her face. Slowly, a radiant smile spread across her lips. Tears shimmered as she whispered, Are you sure, Daniel? Really sure. I've never been more certain, he said quietly, pulling her into his arms. Life's too short for regrets. I want this. I want us. Outside, a passing graduate student glanced into the office and caught sight of their embrace. She paused, a knowing smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Quietly, she tiptoed down the hallway and pulled out her phone. "Hey," she whispered excitedly. "Remember how worried we were about Professor Morgan after everything fell apart? Well, looks like he's finally found his happy ending." Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.